When we think about wrestling with God, we often think about that in context of something that we're trying to figure out. Maybe we have an ethical dilemma. So we are faced with a choice or a decision, and we know what God would want us to do, having heard and listened and thought about the words and the ways of Jesus and prophets and others. But we also hear the voices of other people who are telling us that, oh, you don't really have to do that. You don't really have to live like that. You know, you need to make a decision that really benefits just yourself. And so we're just not sure, and so we wrestle with that decision. We wrestle with God. Or perhaps something has happened to us. Perhaps we have been hurt by someone that we care about. Perhaps it is a friend or a family member, and it just doesn't seem fair. Or perhaps we've gotten word of an illness, and we've done everything we can to take care of ourselves, and it's just not fair. And so we wrestle with God, trying to understand, why has this happened to me? Now, I don't know about you, but often when I wrestle with God, it feels as if the conclusion is foregone. I mean, we kind of know who's going to win, right? God being God and me or we being human beings. And so perhaps we engage in the wrestling match with some passion or intensity for a while, but then we just think, there's nothing more I can do. Okay, God, you win. And we walk away from that match, maybe ready to follow God's words and way, maybe ready to live with what is unfair and uncomfortable, but maybe not. Maybe we have decided, there's just no beating God, there's just no winning. Maybe I'll just do what I need to do. This has been a part of the relationship between human beings and God since the beginning of time. It will continue to be a part of our relationship, our interactions. And our third scripture passage today is an account in the book of Genesis, and it is Jacob wrestling with God. And as we hear this account, there are a lot of questions that arise in our mind, and if they're not, there should be a lot of questions that arise in our mind. And part of that is, what is this passage saying about this type of wrestling when God wrestles with human beings? What is this passage saying about the interaction that God has with Jacob, but also with us as we wrestle with God? So I'd ask that we might listen for the word of God as it is found in the book Genesis, reading from the 32nd chapter, starting at verse 22 through 32. The same night Jacob got up, took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. May God bless this reading from Holy Scripture. Okay, so a little bit of context first about Jacob, just so we know who God is wrestling with here. Jacob is one of the more famous people in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. And often when we think about the famous people, we think, well, they're just all good, wonderful folks. And most of them have at least something wonderful about them. Jacob, up to this point in the book of Genesis, is actually mostly a scoundrel. He is a twin. And his older brother Esau was born first. But as Jacob is being born, he's grasping for Esau's heel. He's trying to grab Esau's heel and pull him back so that Jacob can come out first. It's actually what Jacob means. The name means supplanter or grabber. Interesting, huh? He wanted to be first because the firstborn son in a family gets most of the goodies, gets the birthright, gets to control the family, gets pretty much most of the wealth. And so even as a being inside the womb, Jacob knew this somehow and wanted to be first and didn't care if it meant pushing his brother behind. Now, as the story goes along, Jacob didn't give up on this dream or this plan, and he finds a way to trick his brother Esau into trading this birthright, all this potential and this possibility and this wealth, for a bowl of beans, because Esau was really hungry. And Jacob took advantage of it. He knew he could do this, and he took advantage of it. He got the birthright, and then he tricks his father Isaac into sealing that deal for him. And then he knows he's in trouble, because Esau's mad, other members of the family are mad, so he knows he has to escape. He takes off with his mother's blessing. He heads off to another land. He meets his cousin Laban, and after much negotiating and work with Laban, he leaves there with 2 wives, 11 children, and also many maids, and lots of animals, because he's tricked Laban into giving him much of the flock. He's a deceiver. He's a scoundrel. And he is trying to go home. And he knows he has to face Esau. And he's worried. He is concerned. What am I going to do? And he has devised a plan that he's going to bribe Esau and hope that maybe Esau will forgive him at least enough. But he has backup plans. And he's got to this point where he knows Esau is just out there, not too far. 400 people are with Esau. He is really afraid he is going to be overwhelmed. So what does he do? He sends his wife and children across the river, and he stays back. This is who God comes to. He's a scoundrel. He's a scoundrel. So they engage in this wrestling match that happens all night long. And we think, well, you got God and you got Jacob the scoundrel. This is going to be a beatdown, right? This will be like on World Wrestling, whatever, and where you know who the good guy is, you know who the bad guy is, and eventually the good guy really takes it to the bad guy, and it doesn't happen like that. I mean, what's up with that? God wrestles all night and can't defeat Jacob? And then we're told that as it gets to the dawn, that God realizes God's not going to beat Jacob, so he dislocates his hip. He does something, twists his leg, and still Jacob doesn't give up. He holds on for dear life. Holds on. So God says, all right, what do you want? Because in the time in which the stories of Genesis were told and eventually were written down, there was this belief, we think, that divine beings could come and visit the earth, but if they were there at daybreak, they became human beings. They weren't divine anymore. So God knew God had to get out of there because the sun was coming up. And isn't these stories just amazing? So anyway, God knows the sun's coming up. He's got to get away from Jacob. Jacob's holding on for dear life. And so he says, all right, Jacob, what do you want? Jacob says, bless me. God says, okay, I'm going to give you a new name. Strange thing. You're no longer Jacob. You're no longer the grabber. You're no longer the supplanter. You're Israel. You are God rules. And Jacob, being Jacob, says, well, what's your name? And he says this not because he wants to be able to say hello later on. He says this because in Jacob's time, if you knew someone's name, you could control them. Jacob's thinking, if I get God to tell me God's name, I get to control God. That's good for me. Has Jacob really changed? After all this, has he changed? I don't know. God's not having any part of that. They finally break up. God goes to wherever God is, all different places, heaven. Jacob walks away, limping. So what's the story about? What's that to teach us? You know, that it's like okay to be a scoundrel? It's okay to deceive and cheat people, and then we'll get a chance to wrestle with God, and then God will bless us? I mean, what's up with that? Let's step back. Part of what I think this story is saying is that God comes to us. And it doesn't matter if we're perfect or imperfect. If we've done everything right in our life, or if we've done everything wrong in our life. Or if we are like the vast majority of people, we're kind of a mix of the two. A lot of good, some not so good. God comes to us, and God engages with us. And the choice that we have is whether we're going to engage in that wrestling match. How deeply are we going to engage in it? Are we going to really go after it? Are we going to passionately wrestle with God like Jacob did, holding on for dear life? Or do we kind of go, okay, you're God, you win, okay. And then we sort of nod our head and we go back to our life as it pretty much was. Do some good, some bad. Still just really not sure how to best live our life. Or do we passionately engage in this wrestling match? Passionately engage in wrestling with God. So we listen intently to what God is saying. And we rage at God. Right? Wrestling is not a nice little sport. This is, you get down and you get dirty. You get cut up. And sometimes you get hurt. That's what wrestling's about. So we rage at God. We yell at God. And God yells back at us. And we go back and forth. And at the end, God blesses us. And says, okay, now you go off. You have a new identity. You are a new person. Out of this wrestling with me, you are a new person. You're not completely new. You still have a lot of your old attributes, but you see yourself a little clearer now for who you really are. You understand the gifts and talents you have to an even greater extent. And you understand what I'm calling you to do and what I need you to do in the world. The decisions I need you to make in the world that cut against the grain. The pain that I need you to do the best you can to deal with, reaching out to others for help. The illnesses that will come your way, not because I send them to you, but because that's how the world works. Stuff happens. And I need you to deal with them as best as you can, reaching out for the help that you need around you. This is what God says to Jacob. All right, go out and be better than you were. Here's a new identity. Try not to be such a scoundrel. And when we wrestle with God, we pretty much hear the same thing. Go out and be all you were created to be. Yeah, some of this is going to hurt. You're going to walk with a limp. You will not be the same as when we intensely and passionately wrestled as before that. You will not be the same. We will not be the same if we engage with God that way. But that's okay. That's the point. We get changed. And though we might be hurt, we get changed for the better. And somehow we find the confidence to live into who we were created to be. Somehow we find the courage to make the choices that we need to make. Somehow we find the will to do what we've been called to do. It hurts. There's no getting around it. Jacob hurts for the rest of his life. He limps for the rest of his life. And he also helps bring about the nation of Israel. You ask him, he'd probably say it was a fair trade. Let us ready ourselves for wrestling with God. For God will come find us. Amen.